there's this whole resurgence of influencers and doctors saying like, no, 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 estrogen's fine, take it for your whole life. And I thought, like, was I wrong? Like, I had to go back to my chapter and re-litigate this whole thing for myself. I was like, did I get this wrong?
I'm Annemarie McQueen, journalist and proud 50-ish woman, and we are here looking for the true truth in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond.
Opening our minds to other possibilities is not always easy.
Hotflash Inc.
You're all woman to me. All right, Annemarie.
I want to thank off the top Bonafide Health. Bonafide was a gold sponsor of the very first Hotflash Inc. Summit, managed to bring together 36 amazing speakers, not a fear-mongering person in the bunch. And we helped over 3,000 women sort out what's going on with their perimenopause and menopause health. We went way beyond hot flashes and sleep problems. We got into trauma and so much more. And I'm so proud that they were able to help me do that. Bonafide provides novel, safe, effective, and research-backed solutions for women's health, from hot flashes and vaginal dryness to mood and skin changes. Bonafide is working to set a new standard for menopause care by bringing their trusted, evidence-backed options to the retail aisle nationwide in the US at Target. Bonafide is providing millions of women with more access to science-backed solutions. To learn more, visit hellobonafide.com and be sure to use code SUMMIT20 to receive 20% off the first month of any Bonafide subscription product. Thanks again, Bonafide. I really appreciate it. Hi there. Welcome to the Hot Flash Inc. podcast. Today's episode is really important. It was recorded a couple of weeks ago, but I think it still stands. I am introducing Jennifer Block, an independent journalist whose recent work has been essential in connecting the dots on the business of estrogen and the evolving landscape of menopause care. In the past few weeks, Jennifer has published 3 very important articles. First, in the Free Press, that's Barry Weiss's Free Press. I grew up in London, Ontario. We also had a Free Press. It is definitely not the same paper. That paper has about 3 pages in it now. So her first article was timed with the FDA's announcement about removing the black box warning on estrogen products, not just vaginal estrogen, but all estrogen products. It was done in a way that is not consistent with how things like this are normally done. Then she wrote another piece for the British Medical Journal, and most recently on her own Substack. And taken together, these 3 articles fill in gaps and fill me with wonder and awe because they tell me things that I have long suspected existed, but I didn't know how. And Jennifer has this deep knowledge in this space because she is an independent journalist who focuses on medical practice and evidence, public and personal health, the polarization and politicization of science, conflicts of interest, and abuses of power. We spoke just after the FDA decision, but before her BMJ and Substack pieces were published. So I'm linking to all 3 articles in the show notes. Please be sure to check them out. I think you're really going to enjoy my conversation with Jennifer.
What do you think of the menopause conversation in the US at this moment?
Like so many conversations in the US, it is polarized and just infused with so much emotion and hyperbole. And it's been set up as this sort of fight, that you're on the side of, against women raw dogging menopause, to quote Mary Claire Haver and others who are just fear is so 2002. Everyone needs to get over it. This was all wrong. All of the hesitation and, concern about any risk with hormone therapy was just a mistake. And then, the very less represented, I think, minority who are concerned can also sometimes speak in some hyperbole. But I generally think that they're just not, I don't see them quoted in the media. Yesterday, I spoke to she was the lead statistician on the WHI, Garnet Anderson. And I said, I'm seeing all these pieces now referencing the WHI. has anyone approached you guys to get your side? And she said no. And same thing with the film, The M Factor. Did anyone go to the people who were on that? So it's really unbalanced. And in my reporting, I just am trying to go to the data and just look at it more dispassionately. And full disclosure, I am about to turn 49. This is personal for me too. Yeah, that's my summation of the conversation in the US anyway. Is it better in Canada? Is that your home
Well,
country?
there's just less famousness. You know what I mean? Like there's just less famous people. But I started this in 2020 and it was just I think Gen X women saying I don't want it to be shameful and I don't want to feel bad about it and I want to just be able to say menopause and not have anyone be weird and then give women really good information about it. But even back then I noticed that it was polarized. I felt like it was similar to I haven't had children, but similar to the all natural childbirth or I'm going to take them like I felt like just looking at it from the outside when I didn't know anything about it, it felt a bit like that. And it still does feel like that to me, where,
Mhm.
and I think the weirdest thing is that if you question anything about the hormone therapy narrative that's developed, you can be attacked for being anti-feminist.
Oh yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it is very similar to the childbirth conversation in the way that the narratives are presented in the media. I think though on the ground, you know, um, women just they want to get appropriate care, they want appropriate intervention. It's not that, women who don't want an epidural or are concerned about a cancer risk of hormones or like anti-science or anti-feminist or
Yeah.
you don't want to take women back to having to suffer. It's that they want to have the best outcome. And that's true for childbirth too. Like, and that's a topic that, I mean, that's the topic that really got me into this whole beat of women's health. That was my first book. And the epidural, especially, is presented as this empowering intervention. It's fallen under the banner of women's empowerment. And the same thing with hormones. It's like, oh, you want to be one of those women, one of those crunchy, natural women who's just going to shrivel up into a prune. Go ahead then. We'll be over
Right.
here with the cool girls. And, but I think on the ground, like that's really not the way most women are thinking about it. And they're so lopsided. I mean, the thrust for intervention in childbirth is so much bigger than the tiny group of birth activists who've been trying to, get a word in for decades that, hey, we have this really high C-section rate. We have these terrible outcomes in the United States. There's a relationship between those and all the interventions that are overused. And that's a totally reasonable critique that is actually based in science
Mhm.
and based in the goal of just, better outcomes. So with this topic, I did I did write about this in my 2019 book. And so in the mid 20 whatever 2010s, I was following this and it's just so interesting because back then I remember distinctly being at a conference where this window theory was being presented,
Mhm.
and so this was only 10 years post WHI. But
Mhm.
back then it was they got it wrong. If you start earlier, you don't have the same risks. So I was hearing that back then. And so in my 2019 book, I talked to some experts and went over the data, and they all said the same thing. They said this Windows theory is a theory, it's a hypothesis, it's not grounded in the data. There's nothing wrong with the WHI data. And so that's what I wrote in my chapter. And in fact, Adrienne Fu Berman, who I quoted in the piece in the Free Press, she told me back then that, the cultural commitment, belief in estrogen is so strong that she recalled being shouted down at conferences, called terrible things, maybe even a Nazi, because she, dared to confront the dogma with the data. And so like there's there's obviously a huge industry interest, pharmaceutical industry interest in reviving their market. There was a huge market for these products. It went way down after the WHI, and so their natural mandate to their shareholders is to get those profits back up. And she's done a lot of work. She and others have done a lot of work tracing the industry influence of these messages. But there's also this huge cultural love or love-hate relationship with hormones, and the idea that taking estrogen is going to keep women not only vibrant but sexually available and all that is, I think, really, really entrenched. And so when I started facing all this social media this year, it really, like, the algorithm really found me. Like, I clicked on one skincare thing and it was like the next thing I knew, my entire Instagram, which used
Yeah.
to be lots of birth videos, because
Right.
now it was like, don't do face yoga, do this workout, take this face cream. You want the Norwegian Scandinavian natural face cream. No, 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 take estrogen. So my initial pitch to the Free Press was really like, hey, estrogen cream is a thing. That was like the initial
Okay.
impetus for this. But then as I started digging, I was like, wait, there's this whole resurgence of influencers and doctors saying like, no, 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 estrogen's fine, take it for your whole life. And I thought, like, was I wrong? Like, I had to go back to my chapter and relitigate this whole thing for myself. I was like, did I get this wrong? Is the
Yeah.
way? But no, I'm hearing the same thing, that the WHI it was the very appropriate study for the time that it was done, and it found what it found, and we can talk more about that. But still, the theory that oops, sorry, if you start estrogen progestin therapy younger, that your risks are lower. I, my sources are saying that's still a theory. And while there's some data that, yeah, the risk may have been overstated for women who are symptomatic, if you start the therapy earlier and then continue on it for 20, 30 years, there's no data that in 20, 30 years that risk is going to be lower for you. Those are the higher risk categories. And so there's a real, like, disconnect in the communication, I think, coming from the FDA and HHS on this.
You know the feeling when you tried all your health trends, but you're still tired, foggy, or just not yourself? It's not your fault. True health starts deeper at the cellular level. Enter the first ever longevity gummies powered by Mitopure. They're the only clinically proven urothalin A gummies designed to recharge your cells, boost energy, and help you feel strong and vibrant from the inside out. They taste great. I've tried them. They're vegan and clean. And Mitopure's own testing shows they can add up to 12% more muscle strength in just 16 weeks. It's like giving your body a daily cellular tune-up. If you want to feel energized now and as you age, click the link to timeline.com in the show notes and use my code HOTFLASH for 20% off your first order. That's timeline.com and code HOTFLASH for 20% off your first order.
Yeah. It feels very strange to me because is it Marty McCary or Marty McCary? I always don't know if I'm spelling his or sounding his name.
I think it's Macari.
McCary. He
I
came
hope
out
we're
like
right.
all guns blazing, like super in favor of hormone therapy and estrogen. And then from then on, it's just like this just push. Like they had all those presentations in the summer. And I don't know if you were paying attention to the, your brain eats itself thing that was on social media recently.
Mm-mm.
I'm probably going to mangle this, but Dr. Roberta Diaz-Brinton, who does dementia research, presented for 5 minutes on her work and ended up speaking about glucose metabolism and how the brain can catabolize itself in perimenopause, but sort of skipped a whole bunch of important steps in her own research. And then Kelly Casperson was on a popular podcast and said, like, is it true that the brain eats itself? And I just found this whole thing, there's just so many examples of how this feels like feminine forever. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Mary Claire Haver went on the Dax Shepard's I can't remember. Oh my God, I can't remember the name. A Dax Shepard's podcast. And she came up with what I call the ball sack theory. She said it would be like, your ovaries would be like if a man had an empty ball sack flapping in the wind. And I was just like, if this isn't like eunuch speak,
Wow.
like why are you talking about us? So I wrote
Wow.
a piece this week said like, dear menopause, thank you, but stop talking about us like this. Like
Yeah.
if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's like I need to speak nicely about myself. I don't know why. I feel like the elevation, because I've been following their rise, and I feel like as they've gone on bigger and bigger podcasts and had bigger and bigger audiences, they've been saying more and more outrageous things because they play well and they go viral. I just can't imagine a doctor in an office ever talking to you like that, or any doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really hypocritical because one of their major talking points is that fear is so 2002, that, there was this huge overreaction, and they're just playing into so much fear just coming from the other side. Like,
Thank
you have to
you.
fear this transition, and oh my God, I mean, my brain eating itself
Yeah.
or a ball sack. Like, these are enough to go and get me an appointment online and get
No, like
that's
I'm going to
enough
go
to
to Switzerland
scare.
and get one of those pods. Like it's just time to, and Ravonda Wright was on a podcast as well. And she was talking about Aunt Mary, she's seen, she said she's seen all these women with these hip breaks, and none of us want to break a hip. I'm watching The Sopranos
No.
right now. And, his mother gets in an accident and the lady breaks a hip and they all go like, it's never been good to break a hip,
Yeah.
but she's talking about Aunt Mary. She's down in the bottom of the bed and she's soaked in urine and she's screaming, and I'm like, why isn't anyone getting Aunt Mary pain meds? Like I don't understand why.
No, she needs estrogen.
She
Um,
needs estrogen. Yeah. And what do you think about this focus on estrogen? Because we have progesterone as well. It's crazy
yes.
because Dr. Alyssa Dweck wrote a piece for my Substack this week, and she talked about at the Menopause Society there was interest in progesterone, and I was like, really, in 2025? That's so interesting.
Finally. Yeah, I mean, these are the nuances. I wished I had had 5,000 words in the free press, because I really did want to bring in Dr. Geraldine Pryor's work and yeah, progesterone. I wanted to talk about the differences between the hormones. I didn't want
Yes.
to just mention progestin and progesterone without talking about the difference. And I do think that that is one of the valid points about extrapolating the findings from the WHI to now, is that they did study what was being used at the time, and not only used for symptoms, but women were being told this will protect your heart. And so millions of women were taking a combination Premarin, which is estrogen derived from pregnant horse's urine,
Yep.
conjugated equine estrogen, and MPA, which I hate pronouncing, but medroxyprogesterone acetate. Did I get it right? Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a progestin that is in birth control pills. And we know that these progestins, not only that one, but like drospirenone, progestins have a high risk profile. They vary. And so we already know that. And the women who were studied in the WHI were taking a combination of those, or if they didn't have a uterus, they were taking just estrogen, another nuance that gets lost. Um, and so the products today more commonly are patches and creams and different form of estrogen. And then also especially a lot of the influencers are recommending the bioidentical micronized progesterone. And so they are different drugs. It is definitely, I think, a valid hypothesis that the progestin being used in the women who were studied in the WHI may have been the source of a lot of the risk. But we actually just don't know because we're
Yeah.
not
The
we're not
smartest.
doing a comparable study of what's being used today. And that if the FDA had announced that, well, first of all, if they had done this the right way and convened an advisory committee of people who actually had been vetted for conflicts of interest, who brought research to the table, if there had been a spirited evidence-based discussion, what might have come out of this is, yes, definitely the black box label on the vaginal estrogen creams should never have been there in the first place. Get it off. Those have been studied and seem to be safe even for women with cancer risk. But maybe they would have said, but we don't know the risk of the current formulations. Let's mount another large trial. We have millions of women using these products. We have the internet now and a social media universe of influencers who are pushing for this and telling women they're going to be an empty ball sack
Yeah.
flapping in the wind if they don't get on this stuff. Let's study it.
Mm-hmm.
It won't take that long. We can do this. Commit some real research dollars toward finding out and finding out if progestins, in fact, are the problem. We could have
But
found that out. So
but if that was done, and Marty McQueen said this on a clip I saw from NPR. He said, we can argue. Well, he was doing a red herring. I think he was like throwing attention away from estrogen and saying, we can argue all day long if it was the MPA. But if you do that study and you find out what some of the forward thinking people believe is that it was the MPA, then aren't you going to call into question the pill and the IUD? So isn't there a reason not to do that research?
And I've written about the resistance, even in the women's health advocacy world, to taking anything off the market that might be higher risk. Not in the unconflicted women's health advocacy world, but they hardly exist anymore. The National Women's Health Network was one of the last organizations that, refused to take any pharma money, and they folded last year.
Yeah.
But when drospirenone pills came up at the FDA, and I forget if it was hearings or what happened, but I think it was a hearing. And the question was, this product has 2 to 3 times the risk of all the other pill products. Should this class of pills still be on the market? And, Planned Parenthood came out, other women's health groups came out and said, we need options. We need everything to be on the market. Depo-Provera has been very controversial, but we don't want to, I think, and I've written about this. I think this is a bit of a problem in the feminist world, that we do not want to talk about any of the downsides. But so I think you're right. That is a conflict of interest for many reasons to go under that rock. But progesterone alone, it's fascinating. I mean, Geraldine Pryor's research and maybe others about is decades old at this point. Am I right about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Showed that it's just as effective at reducing at least hot flash symptoms. And actually, in the course of this research, I was already having hot flashes, and I said, like, maybe I should try the brain, and I just hadn't looked into it that much,
Yeah.
and no one had suggested it at the doctor's office. And I finally, I was interviewing someone, and I said, how hard is it to get this? She's like, you can just order it. It's not even a prescription. So I did, and I said, how quickly will I know if it's working? And she said, oh, within a couple weeks for sure. And I am taking like the lowest possible cream dose. I just get, a couple of flashes a day now.
Okay,
Whereas
that's
before
crazy.
it
Well,
was quite annoying. I've been living in a hot climate, so
okay. Well, I do think it's interesting, like as a woman who's going through menopause, it just depends whose office you end up in. And you're probably going to
yeah.
end up in a doctor's office. Like I've interviewed so many doctors, mainstream doctors, and they're kind of like this about the difference between progestin and progesterone. Like they don't
Yeah.
really get it. They are not taught it, and they don't rate it. And so if you went to a naturopathic doctor or an integrative functional physician, they all use it and they all do really well with women. And it's
Yep.
funny because in perimenopause, it's not really always estrogen's role, but when your estrogen's rising and falling and your progesterone's falling, but the narrative is go straight to estrogen, like go in, go hard. And that's one of the
Right, right.
biggest things I learned is that why would you do that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like what I've seen coming from OBGYN influencers, many of them, there seems to be like, warring camps now. But
Yeah.
for a long time, the dominant influencer point of view on bioidentical was that it was a myth, that
Yeah.
it doesn't exist. That's just a lie. That's just a marketing term. It doesn't mean anything. And so, when I came back to this year, one of my big questions was like, okay, I need to really wrap my brain around this. Is there a bioidentical thing? Is this just a marketing term? And I think there is a difference. There is a
Yes.
difference. I mean, is it the exact, no, it's not coming from your body, but
No, you got to have a word for it.
there's
Like,
molecules matter. I mean,
yeah.
I think we only need to look at the different risk profiles from the different progestins and pills to understand that molecules matter. Same in childbirth, the synthetic oxytocin that they give women to induce contractions has much different effects than the oxytocin our bodies make that is like the love hormone and is all feel good. I mean, talk to any woman who's had an induction in the hospital without an epidural and they will tell you it is not the warm fuzzy feel good hormone. It is a different thing. So I think we can put that to rest, that these are different molecules, they do different things, and they shouldn't be conflated.
Well, it was interesting as it's been explained to me that Bioidentical was a scam or not real until the pharmaceutical industry started making patches and gels that were bioidentical and then started making oral micronized progesterone. I can't track that. That's sort of like,
Hmm.
that's one thing I want to ask you is when I try to talk to people about the forces of pharma that you can't see. I mean, you interviewed Andrea in your free press piece about Andreas, sorry, in your free press piece about Andrea. Is it Andreas? Few
Oh, Adrian. Sorry, I didn't
Adrian.
know
Sorry,
who you were
you
talking about.
interviewed Adrian for your free
Adrian
press.
Feuerberman. Yeah.
Huberman. That was fascinating to me. And I had this aha because I was like, I have known that this was happening, but you just don't know how. So tell me a little bit about
Yeah.
that and sort of the unseen forces.
Yeah, well, it's not just her research. I mean, there have been plenty of researchers who've looked into the methods that pharmaceutical companies use to ghostwrite papers, to do education campaigns, quote unquote education campaigns in advance of the release of a drug called condition branding. And I traced, a particular campaign several years ago for the female Viagra, which they did a very successful job at getting legit women's health and feminist groups on board to petition the FDA, to make this gender equality argument that men have Viagra, women don't have anything. We
Mm.
need to approve this drug. The drug was called Addie, and it had a really lackluster performance in trials. It had actually been, if I'm getting my facts straight, I'm pretty sure this was the one that had been rejected a couple times as an antidepressant because it just didn't show enough of an effect. But when they measured libido in a very granular way and maybe like it had like zero point 0.2 more sexually satisfying events per month or something like that. They were able to show something, but it also came with a bunch of side effects like chronic yeast infections and couldn't be mixed with alcohol. Also, you had to take it every day. It wasn't like
Oh,
Viagra where
yeah.
you're gonna go out and you take it. It was like an everyday kind of drug. So that you couldn't mix with alcohol and would cause, had a higher rate of yeast infection problems. Anyway, but I mean, this campaign was so successful. Oh, yes, it was called Even the Score. It was so
Mm.
they set up a website, Even the Score. They brought on a bunch of spokespeople and experts. And I mean, my colleague and I, Liz Canner, who's a filmmaker who made a great film years ago called Orgasm Inc., we went and showed how this had been completely engineered by pharma. And unfortunately, like the advocacy groups just completely fell for the line that this was an issue of equity and sexism, and didn't look closely at the data or
Yeah.
and so this is the kind of thing that happens all the time. And you'll notice like if you see a campaign like that and then it quickly disappears, then it was
Yep.
condition branding. It was
Condition
stood up
branding.
just to kind of prime the market. But then more seriously, there's infiltration of the medical journals and the way that Fuberman's research lined right up with the talking points that we still see that are coming out of the mouths of these, menopause
Yeah.
influencers that, oh, that was a flawed study,
I've
I
seen too, I don't mean to interrupt you, but in the beginning I was like, aha, because I saw in the same week, I saw compounded hormones are a scam and natural is a weapon to keep women in their place. And I saw it from different
Mm,
members of, and so that's coming, that's being
right,
fed, that there's no accident. People don't start saying the same thing using the same
right.
language. I just don't know that people realize this. And I actually was even offered $1,000 a month to take hormone therapy, if you can believe it.
Really?
Yeah, by a telehealth company in the US. And of course, I wasn't going to do it, but I was just asking them questions like, well, what if it doesn't go well? Like, what if I have side effects? What if there's a problem? And then they just gradually stopped answering. But I can't be the only
Wow.
one that was offered. And there certainly have to be people who accepted that offer. That's a pretty chunky offer just for like the average person, you know?
That is.
It doesn't seem
That's
like it should be right, though. It doesn't seem like you should be offering money for people to go on something like that. It doesn't feel right
no, and
to me.
that's really fascinating. I wonder how many other people have been offered that and
Is what,
by
yeah,
which
I know.
companies.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is a really interesting world right now where this whole market of telehealth companies are really working right around the FDA. I mean, the label coming off matters, but also these companies, because they're going through compounding pharmacies, they're working off label. And so there's no label, there's
Yeah,
no
yeah.
warning label on those. I don't think. Am I wrong about that? That if you get a product from a compounding pharmacy with estrogen, it's not coming with a warning label.
I don't think so because they're bespoke preparations
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. It's
These
the pharmaceutical
companies,
manufacturer that's
yeah,
required to do it. Yeah.
yeah, these telehealth companies too are doing great things. Again, it's all great, but I know from behind the scenes, they're doing a lot of education, but it's like one-sided education, right? Like you're not they, if someone is in a podcast said something that was critical or not glowing, it's removed. Like this is just, and people are following them. And I'm not ever saying women are not smart. It's just that it's all dressed up like impartial information, but it's like that's what they're selling. That's what you're going to hear. And the narrative that I want to ask you about that I'm most confused about that has taken hold is that it prevents dementia and heart disease. And that's the part that I'm just like, how can people actually say that? It's we don't know that. Do you think we know that?
No, we definitely don't know that. And I mean, people like Adrian Few Berman and Garnet Anderson, who a lead statistician on the WHI, are really adamant that those data show that it increased the risk very clearly over time. And they were also really clear that it increased the risk of breast cancer over time. So the longer, this was reiterated to me yesterday, the longer, according to the WHI study, the longer women were on hormone therapy, the higher their risk of breast cancer. So again, if you're a younger woman and you can't sleep and your life is just upside down because of these symptoms, for God's sake, women should be getting relief. And I do think like maybe there was an overreaction on the part of OBGYNs.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, you can look back and at how the results were rolled out at the press conference, at how, the reactions. Yeah, I don't know why in the US we're so good at these like huge pendulum swings where it's like we have a complete overreaction instead of a reasonable measured response. And
Yeah.
so I believe women when they say like, God, my doctor won't prescribe it to me.
Yeah.
I mean, my experience recently was like, oh, look, it looks like you are a geriatric now. Do you want hormones? Like based on your lab. And I was just like, what? It was even before I was like,
You even thought
no, I
about
don't.
it.
So I mean, I'm one person. I can't go by my, experience. And I've certainly had paternalistic doctors not want to play nice. I think that definitely it's fair to say that the response to the WHI perhaps was not the right response and that that women have suffered.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't know the citation you mentioned yesterday on your solo podcast about women who had had hysterectomies, if they were denied hormones, that there's an estimate of actual deaths. And I
Yeah.
believe that. And that I think was one of the tragic outcomes, that there wasn't this distinction made between women with uteruses and women without uteruses and their ovaries, another distinction. Because I think, yeah, women who'd had hysterectomies maybe came away with an understanding that they were at more risk if they went on hormones, when like actually no, if
No.
you've gone through surgical menopause, you're in a totally different category. So I think the messaging about dementia, about this being preventive, is really overpromising and not a fair reflection of what we know and what we don't know.
Mhm.
We don't know the long-term outcomes of being on the current popular hormone regimens.
No.
We can't say we know that based on the WHI, because the WHI wasn't studying those formulations. But when there is an unknown like that, the appropriate communication about that is to say that we don't know, not that there are all these benefits that women have been denied, that millions of women. I
Like,
mean, that's what we're hearing
and the
from the
way
administration right now.
the way it's said, like it reduces the risk by 55%, and also using relative risk, which is one of the criticisms of the WHI, that overblew the risk of breast cancer, was that they use
Yeah.
relative versus absolute risk. And that's all anyone ever uses now. So it's just like, oh, it reduces your risk by a whopping 33% or whatever.
When they're throwing those numbers out, where are they coming from? Is it from a particular publication of the
No,
WHI, or is it from something else entirely?
they'll be from observational studies, but
Okay.
I just interviewed an OBGYN, Dr. Rachel Pope, and she did a study. Do you know this one and how that
I've
was
spoken to her too.
misconstrued?
I couldn't include her in the piece, but I did speak to her.
But do you
Yeah.
know how her study
Yeah.
was misconstrued? I mean, she set
No,
out,
go ahead.
okay, so she had an inkling that there was probably not a, if women went on hormone therapy earlier in perimenopause, the risk probably of getting breast cancer, dementia, and heart disease didn't increase. That was what she set out to sort of look into in a very preliminary way. So it was a database of 120 million people. And
Mm.
she found out that it didn't. Like the hazard ratio was low, and her student presented it at the Menopause Society. And that turned into going on hormone therapy in perimenopause, early in perimenopause, reduces your risk of breast cancer, heart disease, and dementia by 60%. And that was, and Vonda Wright
Wow.
on a Gary Brecka's podcast added brain death. I mean, she said
Wow.
60%. It's absolutely mind boggling how does that happen? Contemporary OBGYN wrote an article saying that. And so
Yeah.
this is all very complicated. Like we didn't study statistics in school. I didn't, I'm constantly like, ouch. But I cannot understand. I say that doctors on social media should have to have a license to share information, just like they have a license to practice.
A statistical license.
Yeah, a statistical license.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. The other thing I interviewed Lara Bryden. I
yeah,
don't think you,
she's great.
and I interviewed some other people too who didn't make it into the piece. And one of the interesting perspectives that I really wanted to bring in was the idea that the way that this transition is being presented right now is hearkening all the way back to the 50s, that it's, deficiency,
Hmm.
that we lose this thing. We're entering a pathological state like diabetes, where we need to replace what our body is losing. And Lara sent me some academic research from evolutionary biology that just reframes that in this lovely way that really has just helped me in the way I'm thinking about, my future, so that I don't sort of fall into the despair that I'm just going to shrivel up, is that we adapt, that women, female humans, have adapted to thrive in our elder years.
Yeah.
We don't just fall apart, but it requires a recalibration, because
Yes.
our cells have been used to all this estrogen for all these decades. Not only that, there's a theory that, with all of the environmental exposure to estrogens, we've actually been overdosed. So our
Mhm.
cells they have to kind of recalibrate. And so, of course, that's going to feel like something, just the way
Yeah,
that
you're going
puberty
to feel a
feels
kind
like
of way.
something
Yeah.
and pregnancy feels like something hormonal, hormones are very powerful. So yes, of course, our bodies have to recalibrate, but they do. And so there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The transition is a recalibration. It involves these symptoms. Speaking of brain melting, I have also heard the interpretation that hot flashes are pathological and are actually like harming your brain, which I've also put to the experts I've talked to, and I've said like, am I literally losing brain cells every time? Like
What did they
are they getting
say?
cooked?
What have they
They said
said?
no. They said no. There's no evidence of that,
Well, this is where I
It's such a
feel,
dangerous thing to think about. And it really, like
yeah,
as data driven as I am, I'm not immune to
no, same,
these
same.
messages, right? So like I have a hot flash and I'm like, oh my God, are my brain cells cooking? This is terrible.
Yeah,
But no, no. So I really like I've gone back to that framing of okay, my body's recalibrating, but at the end of this, my body will be used to, my cells will have ratcheted down their expectations so that my body can still be healthy and thrive. And that will be the end of it,
yeah,
and then if I have other symptoms, they're mostly vaginal for most women.
yeah,
Later, the hot flashes go away. Just
yeah.
at least I think and then you've got the topical estrogen, which is you're not having the question of systemically what's going on. I think that framing is really nice, and I think it would be nice to hear that more often. Like it's just another lens to look at this,
Well, it makes more sense. I'm working on, this is so difficult, but I'm working on a digital tool that people can buy that explains hormone therapy, but the entire spectrum. Because honestly, there's people, you can get hormone therapy that is, you will have your period for your rest of your life. Like Suzanne Summers, if you remember her, she was doing, there's that all the way to people who say, don't even eat chickpeas or flax, like you can't. It's crazy. But I just think it's really interesting that, oh, I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? That's very unprofessional. Sorry.
We talked about brain cooking,
We
evolutionary
talked about,
biologists,
oh, so
cells.
so you see, you don't have, you can take hormone therapy no matter what you believe, but if you believe this, it's a deficiency, then you believe something that doesn't really make any sense. Like why would, how, whoever made us, like just in a bigger non-scientific term, why would they make half of us to just like sort of detonate and right, it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, and what are children estrogen deficient? Like
Oh, exactly.
we have different life stages
Yeah,
with different hormone profiles,
yeah,
and men do too.
yeah.
Women's are just, I don't know.
I don't know.
They're more significant, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, we don't look at children and say, oh, they need to be supplemented. They're not, no, that's their life stage. They're developing. And, after midlife, we are developing a different profile.
No matter what you
And
believe, you can
so,
still take hormones. You mean if you believe it's deficiency or you believe that it's natural, it doesn't matter. Like it's there for you. But it's just a
yes,
nicer way to think. I'm glad you learned. I'm glad she told you about that. Yeah, she's spreading the word. That's her thing that drives her crazy. Okay, we have a
yeah.
little bit of time left. I want to ask you about, I had known you before I knew you because you wrote that awesome article about Dr. Jen Gunter called Doctors Are Not Gods that caused the whole brouhaha in 2019. I've been sort of joking about this, about these menopause doctors. I call them Dr. Menopause Gurus because people are just like literally hanging on their every word, and they'll tag them if something is said that they don't agree with, and just sort of the way that Dr. Gunter talks about herself she's in this conversation. So she's in this conversation as well. And she's interesting because she's countering the menopause. And
Yeah.
I like her take on a lot of it. So I just wondered what your whole, are you allowed to talk about Jen Gunter? Are you allowed to talk
I'm not
about,
under any gag
yeah.
order.
Doctors
Yeah, I
Are
mean,
Not
over
Gods 2025. Let's just ask you about that.
I was trying to do so much more with that piece than just call out Dr. Gunter. This is a problem in medicine writ large, and especially for women. And I mean, I've talked about this on another podcast you can go listen to, so I don't want to rehash the whole thing. But I think I was in 2019, I was barely on Twitter, and so it was very naive to the dynamics of going against someone who already had amassed, a quarter of a million followers. And Twitter was a much different place back then. So, but it is, yeah, it's interesting because I don't follow Dr. Gunter closely. That wasn't ever my, my goal. But I did notice that, her last book was on this topic.
Mhm.
And I actually think that I ended up linking to one of her posts in my piece because she had the goods on the M factor being denied its or revoked, having its continuing medical education credits revoked.
Yeah.
So I had been told that they'd been revoked, but my editor said, like, how do we know this? Is there a link? And I went looking, and lo and behold, Dr. Gunter had
She was
actually
one.
emailed the continuing, whatever that board is called,
Yeah.
and got confirmation. So credit where credit's due.
Yeah, she's on it. I feel like the doctors are gods is it's a little bit resurgent with this menopause conversation, though, just the way things are said. I mean, I've seen a member of the menopause, someone wrote a comment on her site and said, so is there no risk of breast cancer? And the doctor wrote no from hormone therapy, just no.
Yeah, I mean, it's dangerous because we do look up to doctors. We look at them, they have tremendous cultural authority. And it is, like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, and it's irresponsible.
Hmm.
It is frankly irresponsible to make such a concrete statement when we don't know. And I think it's also irresponsible when physicians are, dismissive of their patients' private health practices that there may not be concrete randomized controlled trials on. I mean, that was my point with the piece was
Yeah.
like, there are women using yoni eggs, there are women doing vaginal steams, there are women using yogurt to treat their yeast
Yeah.
infections, something that the Our Bodies Ourselves books recommended in the 70s. And women are allowed to have these folk remedies.
Yeah.
We, all humans,
Yeah.
not everything is going to get studied in a randomized controlled trial. Not everything is going to be officially what physicians learn in med school. Physicians don't have a day on chicken soup, but or kissing boo-boos, or
Yeah.
all these things that we do that we know makes us feel better or makes our families feel better, and that's okay.
Yeah.
They don't need to be beaten down online because they're convinced that some yogurt and garlic helps their yeast infection. Like, just because you're a doctor and you didn't learn that in medical school doesn't mean that that's not true. So we have, this is something that I keep trying to come back to in all my work is the right place for evidence. Evidence is really important. Expertise is really important. And we just are not going to have everything at that level of certainty. All of our personal histories and biomes and there's a lot of mystery still there. What's the best diet for you is not maybe not the best diet for me. Why? I don't know. Is it blood type? Is it like what I was exposed to as a baby? Who knows? But I mean, like, we're all kind of on our own journey figuring this stuff out.
Yeah.
And so, right. So to come back to menopause, like we are all on our own journey figuring this out, but we do have some really good data on some issues, and we don't have it on others. And what all women, what all people, humans deserve is just an honest, accounting of what we know and what we don't know. It shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
But I think our world, our social media world, our economic world does not favor nuance. It
Mhm.
doesn't favor measured tones. It favors all this hyperbole and promising
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate that we have to sift through it. But no, we shouldn't look to doctors as or anyone, any guru. We have to all kind of take it in, metabolize it,
Yeah.
look to find the voices that we think are humble
I like people who
and
aren't certain, who say, I don't know. My mom was a nurse, so I heard probably 3 times a week her complaining about the doctors and what they didn't know and how they acted. So I think it took away that sort of a bit of that reverence, like it's heard it all the time. And when I set out to make Hot Flash, I was like, I want to make it a blend of scientific evidence, human experience, and expert opinion, because it has always driven me nuts when before people started saying the science, it just drove me nuts because it's just, we don't know what we don't know. Well, it's a huge pleasure talking to you. I just feel like, yeah, I hope we speak again, and thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your work, and thanks for your interest and having me on the podcast.
Hotflash Inc. was created and is hosted by Annemarie McQueen, produced and edited by Sonia Mack. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Annemarie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hotflash Inc. Media.